Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I hope that the break was productive for you. I'm audible and visible both. Okay, very good. So what we are trying to do is that we're trying to figure out the issue. So don't worry about that. You heard a little bit of that also. So don't worry about that. So we are now back. I should be audible. I should be visible totally. So very simply, now we will move forward and now pivot towards America and the American Revolution itself. So everybody is with me? Oh, perfect. Now, let's talk about the American Revolution. And till this point, we have discussed how in October 1492, the Christopher Columbus reached the Bahamas, technically Caribbean Islands. Thereafter, from 1493, there was a process of colonization which started. I'll give you the explanation of colonization also. The Spanish took up the lead in exploration and conquest, and there was a lot of patronage which was given to merchants and explorers by these people itself. Now, when we talk about the reasons, this is again me repeating what we've done itself, is that for the European states is for national glory, wealth, bullion means gold and silver. Thereafter, conversion and Catholicism. Spanish and Portuguese push was quite heavy, but as I said, the English were a little bit late to the scene. The English were a little bit late to the scene, and private individuals were the ones who were funding it. On the other hand, the people wanted to come because there was religious persecution. The church was trying to prosecute the people for converting or going towards the Protestant way, and both type of people came. The population pressure from 3 million to 4 million within 50 years, 10 lakh population increase is a very big thing. And economic opportunity in itself is equally important. Catholicism, Catholic Church is the Orthodox Church itself. Now, what I need to tell you very simply is, what is this word called? Colonialism. What do you mean by this? We will discuss it in a lot of detail in the end. In the last module itself is called colonization, decolonization. But I give you a very basic working definition of this. So what is what we call as colonialism? Colonialism is the domination and control of a country, of a country, or region for economic exploitation, and in which take full political control. You take full political control. So very simply, you take control fully of that place. There are two types of colonialism also. One is called settler colonialism. The other one is called exploitative colonialism. Settler colonialism is technically what happened in America. That you reach there, you develop everything, and you make it properly economically exploitative for yourself. Exploitative colonialism, for example, Australia, America, New Zealand. Exploitative colonialism is what happened in India, which is we already had a structure. They came, they changed the structure to exploit us. So colonialism is the domination of a country, and there are two words which you need to know: mother country and colony. Mother country is the one who exploits, colony is the one who gets exploited. Is this definition clear, everybody? Working definition clear? So domination, control for economic exploitation, and full political control. Okay. Imperialism, colonialism, I will tell you the difference later. That is the last module. We have a whole 3.5 hour discussion on that. Don't worry about it. Two types of colonialism: settler, and second is called exploitative. Again, I will do this in much detail. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. Right? So now, what was the wave of migration which came to America? So between 1607 and 1700, more than 1 million people left England to go to these colonies. 1,80,000 went to Ireland, and about the same went to West Indies. Thereafter, 1,20,000 reached initially the Virginia and the Maryland sector, which is a little bit southern sector, and thereafter the second wave, they went a little bit further north to the middle colonies of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. You don't have to learn this data, but what you need to understand is very simply, there are waves of migration which happened to America. Now, we all need to understand something very important. What we've done is America has been discovered, America has been colonized, it has been taken by the British. 9 to 13 colonies have been developed by the British. Now, why do you colonize a country? Tell me. This is settler colonialism. You settle and colonize. Why do you colonize a country? To exploit it. Very good. So you colonize a country for exploitation. Perfect. Now, if you colonize a country for its exploitation, America is useless. America for the British is useless. So now I'm very slowly pivoting towards the reason for the American Revolution. But the point is that America needs to be made economically viable to the British. America needs to be made economically viable for the British. So how do they make it? How do they make it? This is the $1 million question. This is a very important question. How do they make it? So, very simply, we need to understand the process. We need to understand the process. First and foremost point is, I'm going to use two words. When I say British, I mean, when I say British, I typically mean the European colonizer. The question I'm trying to answer here is how did the British make America viable? It does not have good agricultural land. It is somehow having a wall of the Appalachian Mountains. How does the British? So when I say the word British, I mean the mother country. I may say mother country. And when I say the word British American, when I say the word British American, it means a Britisher who migrated and settled in America. Is it technically he is called? Are these two basic difference clear between British American and Britisher? Everybody has to be on the same page with me. Come on. Don't get flustered by the things which are happening. If there's an issue, refresh. Okay, very good. So, the colonizer is the British citizen who sits in Britain but is trying to exploit America. And the British American is the person who is the one who migrated to America but still believes that he's a Britisher. He still believes that he's a Britisher, but he has settled down in America itself. This point clear? Then we go forward. Okay, perfect. Now, how does the British make America of any use generally? That is called the triangular trade. It's called triangular trade. No, don't word prisoners. Prisoners is a very specific thing to Australia. It's a very Australian thing. It's a very Australian thing. Very simply, Australians were convicts, not Americans. Understand this? Okay. So it's called triangular trade. Triangular trade. Okay. What is the triangular trade? You have America, you have England, and you have Africa. You have Africa. Now, what is the question, Vibhuti Jyoti? You need to write it again. Very simply, America has a problem. Land is more than people. So what does it actually mean? If there is more land and less people, then what is the issue? What is the issue? Come on. Yes, very good. This is called labor shortage. They don't have the labor for the land. And if I have migrated to America paying so much money, I don't want to be a laborer. I migrated because I wanted to be a landowner. So everybody has land, acres of it, 100 acres, 200 acres, but nobody to work on it. So America has an issue, which is labor shortage. Value of land doesn't matter. There is so much land you can go and settle, no one cares. Rather, people on reach was given land. Land is too much, people are less. Now, England is they can produce these crops. They can actually produce these crops because the temperature is exactly the way it should be for these things. So now America can produce, but it doesn't have the labor. England wants it. So to make America relevant, what the English do is find a solution, what we call as slavery or slaves, what are called black slaves. Black slaves. I'll write the word black again. Black slaves. See, now slavery is not something new in the world. We had Dasa Dasi tradition in India. We had a lot of things throughout the world. In the Roman period, we had slavery, Roman Greek slavery. But that was not color-based slavery. What is specific to slavery which developed during this period is that it was quintessentially black slavery, meaning all slaves were Africans who were taken out of Africa and taken to America as labor. Now the basic question is, why would the Africans sell their own fellow Africans? And the answer to that question is, Africans don't have a nationalistic understanding at this point of time. Africa at this point of time is different tribes fighting with each other, and once a tribe wins, they take the rival tribe as a prisoner of war. So what the English used to do was that they used to take to Africa manufactured items, guns, and luxury items, and they used to present it to the African chiefs and warlords, or whatever you want to call them. And in exchange for these guns, manufactured items, and luxury items, the African tribes were ready to sell the rival tribe. So, for example, if Ashanti is fighting the Zulu defeated by Ashanti did not think that they are the same people. They were ready to sell the Zulu to the British for items. Slavery, what developed at this point of time, is considered the worst form of slavery, because here the people were property, proper property. It was like an object. The way I own my phone, I could own a person. But the English, what they did was, once they exchanged these guns for slaves, they took these slaves to America, and in America, slaves from Africa, thereafter they took the slave and gold to the Americas, and from Americas they started to send the goods which were needed for their own consumption. This is what is called the transatlantic triangular trade. Is this clear? How the Americans or the British made the American colony relevant? Perfect. Okay. Now, a very simple question. So, triangular trade, the one is America, the other is England, and the other is Africa. Okay. It's also known as slave trade. Now, America is a manufacturing hub now, not that point of time. Now, there's another question which you should have asked me. Is that, sir, how is the British generating any form of revenue? They have integrated the Americans into the world trade, but how are they generating any form of revenue? This question is relevant, irrelevant? It's a relevant question. Technically, they don't directly tax. I'll tell you how they used to actually generate revenue. So before 1756, what happened was they used what is called the Navigation Acts. And the Navigation Acts, which were enacted by the British, had three clauses. And now you see how they used to generate revenue. Right? Okay. This is America. This is Britain. And this is rest of the world. Rest of the world. Now the first thing which the first clause of the Navigation Act said that any ship which goes from America to Britain and Britain to America, any ship which is plying between Britain and America should be owned by a Britisher, meaning ship has to be owned and operated by a British. Basically, this means that all ships would be Britisher owned, meaning the shipbuilding industry in America was controlled via making sure that any profit, any merchant, any form of ship which is plying between these two countries or these two colony and mother country is a British. What this does is technically boosts the British shipbuilding industry. First point clear, everyone? Yes, Kartika, technically that only. Very good. How? The question is not how. Because they will make sure that no shipbuilder can exist in America. They will destroy it, they will seize it, they will not allow the shipbuilders to develop. Even if you're building a ship, the Britisher will buy the ship. Either way, the Britisher will actually make sure that the British get what they want out of this relationship. Now, what is more interesting? See, this is the first clause. This is how they generated revenue. What is more interesting is the next two clauses is where and how they actually generated revenue. They said, the Navigation Act 2 and 3 said, if the Americans want to sell something to the French, for example, rest of the world, French, Germans, anyone, Americans cannot sell directly to the rest of the world. Same way, if France wants to sell Americans anything, they cannot sell anything back to the Americans. No form of direct trade allowed. No form of direct trade allowed. No form of direct trade allowed. Rather, if you have to sell to the rest of the world, you first sell to the British, and the British will then sell to the rest of the world. And if the rest of the world wants to sell to the Americans, first sell to the British, and the British will then sell it to the Americans. What do they gain out of this? When there is export-import, what do you gain out of it? Very good. Very simply, the British collected import and export duty at this point, and at this point. Very simply, the way they generated revenue was not direct taxation, rather import and export duty. If the rest of the world sells to the British, you get import export duty. If British is the node between these two countries, if the British is the node between these two things, it gets import export duty here, it gets import export duty here. 3 points they get import export duty. They cannot allow for direct trade because that way the English lose money. So the British taxed the merchants import and export duty, first and second at this point, third and fourth at this point. Very simply, Britain became the intermediary. I'll tell you, Prabhat, why. The British became the intermediary between the two halves, the rest of the world and America. Is this point clear? First, is this clause clear? Why will Americans agree? I'll tell you this. Okay, now the question is, why would the Americans allow this? Firstly, they are not American at this point of time. They consider themselves British American. So they believe that it is the legitimate right of the British to get this because they are the ones who connected. If your friend gets you a car which is very, very expensive, very rare, if the friend takes a little bit of cut, you won't mind it. Very simply, the British Americans said that we were dying of hunger. हम तो भूखे मर रहे थे. But the Britishers allowed us, connected us with the world. Therefore, they are the ones who can legitimately collect revenue. Are you getting my point? The Britishers and the British Americans, their attitudes are different. And that is the next point itself I discuss with you. First, let me summarize this part and I will discuss this with you. See, is everybody following me? This is totally new to you. I understand it's heavy, but you need to think with me. Is everybody following this? French, Portuguese, Spanish have to obey because smuggling would be stopped. Okay, now very simply, very simply, let's try to understand what is the situation. Britain has a colony in America. Again, listen to me very clearly. I'm summarizing. Britain has a colony in America, 9 of them, later becomes 13. They're more or less useless. Nothing at all. If the British Americans don't take the help of the British Crown, they will more or less die. So the British make British America or America itself relevant to their larger empire by integrating it into the triangular trade. Slave trade sustains America. Now, if the Britishers are the ones which gives you the slaves also, if the Britishers are the one which integrate you to the world trade, won't you allow the Britishers to take what they're taking at that point of time? Yes or no? Yes, if you're saying no, patriotism is coming out. Don't. They don't believe. They believe they're the same. So very simply, before 1756, let's talk about attitudes. Let's talk about the British attitude and let's talk about the British American attitude. Can we do that? Everyone? Can we do this? French, Portuguese, Spanish have different colonies, connections, their development. But Anubhav, it's all these colonies are in a way blockaded to each other. It's not very fluid relationship between them. Okay. Dorsani, the rest of the world does not have to agree. The rest of the world has to agree because it's a British colony. Understand this. It's your land only. It's not about the rest of the world. If the British said that India will not get dominion status, we wanted independence. Did the British give us independence? Then why did we agree to be under the British? This is the type of argument you're pushing through. It's a colonial relationship. It's a colonial relationship. The British dictate everything. And it's not, this is your innocence saying. This is your democracy speaking. This is your constitution speaking. Why would they agree? It's not a democratic system. It's not a WTO base, which is still an American mouthpiece only, but it's not a democratic system. It's a system very closely controlled. Is this making sense? British Americans are citizens who have gone to Britain. British the British generate revenue. Can we agree to these three things at least? Come on, please. Right, perfect. We agree to these things. Now let's talk about attitude. See, the British attitude at this point of time is, we have invested minimal amount of money into America. So whatever we get, we are happy. I'll give you a very simple example. Very simple example. You, or rather let's keep out you. There were two siblings. One sibling did a course from XYZ University, and that BA honors, BA program, whatever course it was 10,000 rupees a year. 3 years, 30,000 rupees. So the father and mother, parents, invested minimal amount of money, 30,000 rupees over 3 years. So if that son or daughter gets us a job which pays 35,000 rupees a month, the parents are happy. The parents are happy. Minimal amount of investment, whatever you earn is a bonus. Is a bonus because investment is zero. Generally zero. And this is technically the British attitude at this point of time. British said, we have invested nothing here. We have invested nothing. We just integrated them the trade. And the British were happy to just take the taxes. They were like, okay, no issues. Perfect, no issues. We'll take the taxes. At the same point of time, the British Americans are also chill. They're like, if the British was not there, we would not be connected to the world. If they're taking something, and remember one thing, if you're paying export-import duty, who pays that export-import duty? Who pays export-import duty? Come on. The merchants. Technically, the merchants. So a common landowner in America doesn't care only. For him, the British is just benevolent. So before 1756, British attitude is, whatever we get is a bonus. Whatever we get, I'll write it again, wait. Before 1756, British is whatever we get is a bonus. Tell me one thing. Why would the British not care 1 year after? Generally, put your modern India hats on your head. Native Americans were killed. Red Indians totally killed. Very good. When Plassey is going to happen, and by 1765, the British is going to have India. The British had the biggest jewel in their crown, India. So whatever they get, bonus. No issues at all. Bonus. Till 1756. And the British American is happy to be, is happy to be part of British trade. Happy. So it's a happy family. So everybody is happy. We are happy to exploit only via taxes. We are also happy to be taxed. Are you getting the attitude here? Tell me. Win-win situation. Both are happy. See, the point is the American population still doesn't think they are separate from the Britishers. They think that they are the same. They think that they are the same. There is no animosity between the two. No animosity between the two. Till this point, happy family, hum saath saath hai, no issues. Can I move forward? What happens after 1756? If everybody is following me till this point, come on. If you're not, I'm again repeating myself. Economically made viable, British attitude, don't care. Whatever we get is a bonus. India is going to come very soon. British Americans, we are happy to be part of British America or the British Empire. We are technically Britishers, not Americans as of right now. Okay, you don't need to make notes, Abhijit. Understand. Is this ratification? It's logical. I'm just giving you a basic argument of how attitudes work. You don't have to make anything. Everything written here is going to give into you in annotated form also. Okay. Okay. So till this point, I'll repeat everything. We started with how the earth was flat to how earth was proved to be round. So with the rise of modern sciences, scientific revolution, people have the guts to cross over into America. America already had inhabitants which were exterminated by the Europeans, literally exterminated by the Europeans in order to colonize it, either converted, colonized or killed. Basically, we are concentrating on the British colonies. British colonies in the worst part of North America made relevant via slave trade, and British and Americans are happy to be in this relationship of very simple exploitation. Is this clear? Anybody who's saying it's hard to follow, this is the story till this point. I have not done anything very, very extraordinary till this point. And I'll tell you one more thing before I move forward. See, in the examination, none of this is going to be asked. In the examination, they will ask you cause and significance of American Revolution. Because mains paper, they can't ask you, write the story of America's colonization. 150 words, 250 words, not possible. So every module, I will actually tell you what is relevant. What is relevant here is cause and consequence. Now, if we are on the same page, can we discuss what happened in 1756? Everybody has to consent. Come on. Okay. Now, see what changes. So we've done Navigation Acts. All trade in ships owned and operated by the British or British colonials, English colonies and England itself, first of the acts. And American and British attitudes before 1756 was a win-win situation, which I've written. It's a situation of win-win. And there were certain trade restrictions which were already put on the Americans. For example, no wool could be produced in America because Britain had the biggest market for that. No hats could be made in America. All hats were imported. This is how they're generating market for the British industries. No iron could be produced in America. Everything was brought in from the English. So the English made sure that they had a very designated market in America. Same way through the Navigation Acts since 1650, they were making sure that the ships were only British owned. Same way the other two clauses said made sure that no trade could happen between the rest of the world and Americans. Americans had to go through Britain to interact with the world itself. Now, what changes in 1756? See, between 1650 and 1750, two things are happening. First is something, you don't have to remember the years. I will tell you what the years are important. But 1756, if you've done modern India, how many of you done modern India? You've done modern India. Why is 1756 so important? No, it's not Plassey. Not Plassey. Plassey is 1757. Buxar is 1765, 64, 65. See, this is how modern India interacts with world history. 1756 is Third Carnatic War. And Third Carnatic War actually coincides with a war which happens in England, which is called 7 Years' War. So this date should automatically be etched in your mind. So it's not a date which is exclusive to world history. So it's Anglo-French rivalry in India. First Carnatic War and Third Carnatic War both actually intersect with world events. And this is why world history is important for modern India. So let me discuss something. See, between 1650 and 1750, something happens in the world, in India itself or in the world itself. And that is called the Enlightenment. Enlightenment. Enlightenment is actually an intellectual movement which starts in France. And you would have heard about their names. Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, Montesquieu. These are very important philosophers. These philosophers are technically, not Hegel and Marx, very late. These philosophers are technically called Enlightenment philosophers. And what the Enlightenment philosophers do is challenge monarchy. Challenge monarchy. They argue that monarchy is the worst form of political formation. And different scholars talk about different things. For example, Montesquieu says that there needs to be separation of power between judiciary, legislative, and the executives. He is the father of separation of powers. Voltaire talks about separation of church and state. Don't have to learn this. We will discuss this again in French Revolution. But Montesquieu says separation of power. Constitutional government is important. Voltaire says church and state should be separate. Religion should not be part of the state. Kant and Rousseau evolve a very important concept which is called social contract, which is that the king does not hold power. We, the people, hold power and we create the state. All of us have certain rights in which life, liberty, property, and freedom are rights which are sacrosanct. But we all give up our rights little bit to create the state so that our rights are not taken away. The concept of reasonable restriction. We all come together and empower the state. This is called the concept of social contract. Again, don't have to learn this, optional level. The basic point of the matter is, by the 1750s, there's a new vocabulary developing in England, which also comes to America, wherein freedom, economic opportunity, representation in government, liberty, property, these are the words now that become very common, and people now start to read these people. So there is an intellectual change which happens in 1750s. This makes sense, everybody? Come on, this makes sense. Very good, perfect. But the nail in the coffin, or what actually starts the American Revolution, is a war which has its antecedents in 1740s. Now again, please pay attention. In 1740, there was a war which happened in Europe. Again, don't have to go into the details. Again, basic thing you need to know. It's called the Austrian War of Trian. Not Australian, Austria. Austrian War of Independence. Not independence. Austrian War of Succession. Austria had a king. Again, listen to me. Look under Germany, you will find Austria. Austria had a king. Austrian king died. Now in Austria, there was a rule that both women and men can claim the throne. So there's a war of succession, that who will come to power. Charles III, again don't have to know this, Charles III and a person called Maria Theresa. Now these two start to fight. Now when these two start to fight, European countries starts to take sides. So one side, or what we call as, for example, France, Spain, they take the side of Charles III, that he should come to power, the man. However, England goes with Maria Theresa, that the woman can also become the ruler of Austria. So basically, in 1740, for 8 years, it's called 1740 to 48. In this period, there was a war which happened in which Austria was at war, it's civil war itself, in which France, Spain were fighting with the English, the Portuguese, etc. But the basic point was France and England. The basic point is that France and England were on opposite sides, of supporting the two people coming to power. Now this war happened in 1740 to 48, spilled over into India in the form of First Carnatic War, but had no impact in America. Now this was won by who won the Austrian War of Succession? Very good. Maria Theresa and the English. But what happens is that within 8 years of this concept, in 1756, this question again came up when Maria Theresa died, and English side was now again fighting, and this war is called the 7 Years' War. This is called the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War happens again, France versus England, over who will come to power in Austria. Now, very simply, the issue is the same. But now France and England are fighting with each other again, and this is called the 7 Years' War. So do you understand the core issue of Austrian War of Succession and 7 Years' War? Second Carnatic War, Nitin, is totally independent, is specific to India. Muzaffar Jang, Nasir Jang, that's a separate issue altogether. We're not doing modern India. So the issue is who will come to power in Austria. That much you can remember, right? You can remember who will come to power in Austria. Friends are fighting with each other. Okay, very good. See, Smegna, Austrian War of Succession, who will come to power in Austria? Two sides. So the issue got resolved in 48, but again comes to power when Maria Theresa is dead. So 56 to 63, they fight another war in which they are fighting for who will come to power in Austria. The issue is the same. Somehow Britain and France are always on the opposite sides. Is this clear? Come on. France and England fighting against, it's a principal concept. In Britain, women can come to power. France, they can't. That is why they're supporting two different areas. Now, unlike the Austrian War of Succession, 7 Years' War spills over into the colonies. So it spills over into this in India in the form of the Third Carnatic War, but it also spills over into America. Now the problem is Britain needs to defend British America. Why France right around the issue of Austria? Because they are supporting two different aspects. Janvi, Neha, yeah. Who came to power? Maria Theresa with the help of the English again. Sudipto, I don't know your doubt. You have to write it again. So, Britain needs to defend British America. Now, tell me one thing. When you have to defend a country via war, it's an expensive affair. It says or does not impact you. There are brother and sister in Austria. Yes. It impacts. It's an expensive affair. Very good. So now the British have to invest in America. And the American 9 colonies, they are fighting with the French in the north and with the Spanish in the east. So when you fight a war, people come together, yes or no? Binod, very simply, the 7 Year War starts in England or starts in Europe. And that war spills over into America. And in America, there are the 3 powers there. France in the north, Spanish, and the English. So when it spills over, they start to fight with each other. And if they are to fight with each other, the British now need to defend the French. The British now need to defend the British Americans. So if they are going to defend the British Americans, they need to pay or send troops. They need to send arms. That is an expensive affair. Now, if you fight together, you develop in a way a patriotic feeling. So what has happened is in 1763, England is going to again win. England wins this war. However, now something has happened. 3 things have happened because of the 7 Years' War. Everybody is following me till this point. Portuguese are in a different continent itself. Okay. Now, 7 Years' War has 3 basic consequences. 7 Year War has 3 basic consequences. First, British national debt. Increases exponentially. Meaning that their debt increases very quickly. Debt means their fiscal deficit in a way, very quickly. Second, British Americans develop a new feeling of being together, the concept of Americanness. The concept of Americanness. Anand, yeah, Gurmukhi, if you want to take her name. Yeah. So you have British Americans developing a new feeling of being together. That is the concept of Americanness. Anand, I hope that your request, I've done it. So British Americans now start to develop a feeling of Americanness. They start to believe that they are not British Americans but Americans. And third, new ideas of freedom, concept of liberty, and representation start to develop. Now, till this point, makes sense? What is the consequence of the 7 Years' War? But weren't they just British settlers only? Samrat, that is the basic point. They now start to feel more and more patriotic towards their land. There's no French in American continent. There are Shalu, I told you, in the north. Okay. Don't get the second one. See, I have 9 different people interacting with each other over trade, but they're not together. Now what happens is, these all 9 or 13 colonies have to come together and fight the French and fight the and the Spanish. When people fight with each other, they start to develop a feeling of togetherness, and that is called nationalism. Basically, they are now starting to feel more and more American. The fact that I am an American and not a British American. We have settled in America and we are now distinct to the British. And this is what is the concept of Americanness. Getting my point, everyone? Come on. How America affected by 7 Years' War. The war spills over into America. Fighting in America is also happening. Okay. Now, tell me one thing. I'll give you another scenario. Your father has invested 30 lakh rupees to make you do a course which is only done in one college in India. And then you get a salary of 20,000 rupees. What is going to happen? Not Mar, but basically, the British is this father. It has invested a lot into America, and now this chiller, if you want to call it, this very less amount of money which comes from that import-export duty is not enough. The British, the Crown, George III comes to power, and Lord North is the Prime Minister at this point of time, and they say that we defended America. So now Americans need to pay for their security and for the fact that we send troops, we send arms and ammunition, and we invested into India, into America. Very simply, the cutoff point is 1756, because before 1756, the British investment into America is nil, zero, not. British don't care. But after the war is over, the British now want that money back. The national debt has increased because they wanted or were defending America. So now the mother country wants something out of its colony. And this is where is the genesis of the American Revolution and the first cause of the American Revolution. So when in the examination, they ask you, what are the causes of the French American Revolution? The first cause is the 7 Years' War, which changes the attitude of the British and the Americans. So the first cause is the 7 Years' War as it changes the attitude. There are two things which happen. The milieu, which is the physical conditions in America, start to change. The influence of Enlightenment comes to America, in which the ideas of civil liberty, life, liberty, property, freedom, liberty, representation, social contract, state formation comes via Montesquieu, Voltaire. You have the first printing press which starts to develop in America, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Political pamphlets, sermons, books, libraries. First paper, Boston newspaper, starts to develop. And there's a new type of ethic which develops within America, which is still called the American dream, American ethic. Optimism, self-assurance, rationalism. Rationalism means reason over religion. And liberty now starts to develop. And this in turn coincides with the change in attitude which happens because of the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War is a conflict between England, Prussia, Austria, France and Spain, in which they are on one side and they are on the other side. Britain's public expenditure, taxes and national debt rose enormously in order to protect the British colonies. Once the Peace of Paris happens, once the war is over, England gains a lot of things. France has to give Canada to Britain, and in return to that, France gets the Guadeloupe and Martinique. These are two colonies in West Indies. Spain gives Florida to Britain in exchange of Philippines and Cuba. But what happens is that cultural identities crystallize due to the war, which is that they start to become more British and American. And British interest and expenditure now starts to change. Expenditure increases enormously. We'll discuss Prussia. Don't worry when we'll discuss unification of Germany, Italy. Now, the immediate impact of the 7 Years' War is George III assumes the throne in Britain in 1760. Debt has increased. So on the eve of the 7 Years' War itself, now the British is becoming more and more serious about any form of leakage. So they start to give writ of assistance. This is a warrant given to the officers in the American waters to check the ships if they're actually not smuggling or defying the Navigation Act. So even before the war was over, and Britain wanted more. Basic point is Britain wanted more. And this greed of the British, once the British start to act like the way they do, is the way they got or they trigger the American Revolution. Now, first point is clear. Can I tell you how this story goes forward? Everybody. So basically, Americans were once British citizens. Yes, all Americans are Europeans. All Americans are Europeans. Remember, all North Americans are Europeans. Okay. Third point is very simple. New type of understanding with regards to Enlightenment thinkers. Ideological background changes. New ideas start to trickle into America. Okay. What about black Americans? They are slaves. They are property. Your table and chair does not ask for rights. That's the basic point. Because of the way because Americans were British, Dutch, Germans, French, all coming together, their English started to evolve. Okay. Now, please explain the last line. Last line is new ideas of freedom, liberty, and representation. Basically, Enlightenment, which is a movement which happens in England, which happens in Europe, the ideas start to spread. The ideological background state changes. Can I move forward, everybody? Because Sudipto, there's something called ego. Okay. Latin America, I know the history, but I don't care at this point of time. Okay. Now, the British now need to get more money out of the Americans. Homelanders, which are called Red Indians, killed, totally exterminated. Europeans are very clear. They don't believe in other people. They kill, exterminated. How to remember all the names in Payal? You don't have to. What is the name I've told you? George III, Lord North. 2 names. And what if 7 years war? That's it. What have I told you till this point? Navigation Acts don't have to remember. Everything is, what is the first cause? 7 years war. Increased expenditure. This point you can remember, right? 8:30 we end, not 8 o'clock. Come on. This point you can understand. 7 years war increases expenditure. Perfect. Now, listen to me. British want more. This greed you can understand. We as Indians understand the British the best. So we can understand that, right? We can understand the greed. Yes, okay, very good. So the British want more because they have put more money. The investment has increased. Your parents want you to do a good job because they have invested 40-50 lakhs in your preparation, in whatever you did. And now what you do is very, very important. Investment has been made, so returns need to come. The British want more. So the first thing which they do, and these are all causes, please understand, each thing which I tell you is a cause. So the first cause of the American Revolution is nothing but the British wanting more, which is called changing attitudes. I will write all of this in the end, so don't worry, just follow me generally, which is called changing attitude. Now, the second thing, if you want to say, or the second cause, or the first thing which they do after the war, was they introduce a new act. They introduce a new act, which is called the Molasses Act. What is the Molasses Act? Molasses means good, jaggery. So what the British wanted to do was, they wanted to make sure that the Americans only consumed British molasses or British good or British jaggery to produce sugar, because when you boil sugarcane, it first becomes jaggery, then it becomes sugar. So very simply, they wanted to make sure that British interest is protected. So what they do is that they introduce a small cess, that if a buyer buys Spanish or French molasses, meaning they go to the West Indies and buy that molasses, they would have to pay 6 pence, meaning how you have paisa, $1, 6 pence, 6 paisa, 6 pence duty on that. So on every gallon, which is close to 2 liters, on every gallon you pay a duty, so as to make sure that British molasses is good, jaggery, is cheaper. It makes it cheaper. Technically, understand it like a custom duty. So very simply, the Molasses Act was amended, a 1733 Act was amended, and 6 pence duty was put on a gallon of molasses bought from the French and the Spanish West Indies, Caribbean islands. But this is again where you need to put a sword, you are putting a needle. This is not going to impact too much. So this had a very limited impact on revenue. So the British now go for the blunder of this century, which in turn led to the launching of the American Revolution. There's no way of not exaggerating this aspect. It was a literal blunder, and maybe the British could have avoided the American Revolution if they had not done this. Now tell me one thing. Import-export duty, these duties are paid by whom? Are paid by whom? Paid by merchants. So if today the government of India says that on every liter of milk exported out of India, there will be 100 rupees duty. Does it impact you and me? Yes or no? Don't talk like an economist. Direct impact, yes or no? No. Yes, you are saying because there will be cascading effect, inflation. Don't talk like a 20-23%. Think like 1750s. So no. Now, so very simply, these taxes are not paid by everybody. So in the desperation to get more money, the British introduced the Blunder Act, the act which triggered everything, which is called the Stamp Act. Which is called the Stamp Act. What is the Stamp Act? Stamp Act says that every legal paper, every newspaper, every almanac, everything which is in public circulation, there needs to be a stamp on that paper, and the duty needs to be paid to the British. So very simply, I'll show you that on every paper, there needed to be certain stamps. If this stamp is not there, the paper is not legal paper. And this is called the Stamp Act. Every legal sense, every paper in public circulation needs to be stamped, and that duty goes to the British. Imagine the government of India says, every A4 sheet which you use, you need to have a certain stamp on it, and 1 rupee needs to be paid to the government on every stamp or on every paper. This was the blunder which they did, because Stamp Act impacted everyone. Which is that now every common person has to pay certain amount of tax to the British. Though it's not direct income tax, it's a form of direct taxation of the people. It's an indirect tax. See, all taxes before this were on merchants, 1%, 2% of the population. Now this impacts everyone. So if it impacts everyone, people now, that patriotism came out, and they said that we as Americans are not represented in the House of Commons. So in the Parliament of the British, we are not represented. And now you see how this is called the son telling the father. Very basically, it's a colony. But now they say, no, we are British, we are Americans. We are Europeans, now Americans. We are not represented in the British Parliament. And if you are not represented in the British Parliament, you don't have the right to tax us. And the most famous concept no taxation without representation. Without representation. That, see, I pay income tax. But I pay income tax because my MP and MLA, though they technically don't, but they represent me in the parliament and the state assembly. So no taxation with representation. Oh, sorry, without representation. Now, very simply, what they meant is, I am represented by my MP and MLA in the parliament. Therefore, the government of India has all the right to tax me because I am represented in representative democracy. Now the Americans said two things. Either give us some seats in the House of Commons, or you can't tax us. You can't tax each and every person. So now the Enlightenment ideas are getting mixed up with nationalism, and the Americans are now speaking up against the British. So now there's a very smart, strong divide between the Americans and the British. And what the British actually do, why do I call it a blunder? Because what it does is it politically unites the people. So now people are in the streets demanding the repealment of this act. A new revolutionary organization is formed, which is called the Sons of Liberty. They are the Sons of Liberty. They want liberty. They don't want the tyranny of the British. And now the Americans start to say, we will boycott. You want to tax us without representation, we will not pay. We will not let you trade with us. Americans now had developed a new sense of belonging, a new sense of Americanness. And the protest of the Stamp Act was such that the British had to repeal this act in 1766, which in turn was a major victory for, this was in 1765, because it was a major victory for the Americans. And this act is seen as the stepping stone, because after this, there is no going back. The British had done a blunder, and that blunder will now create the American Revolution. The concept of no taxation without representation means is, if you don't represent me, you cannot tax me. The concept is very simple. When Americans are not represented in the British Parliament, the British don't have the right to tax the Americans, because representative democracy is something which started to now go into the veins of the Americans. Is this making sense, everybody? Very good. So let me read it out to you. See, in 1765, in the desperation to get more money, there's a new duty which is introduced, which is technically duty on newspaper, books, court documents, commercial papers, land deeds and almanacs, meaning everywhere you need a certain amount of tax you need to pay. So the consequence of, and the significance of this is, for the first time, the Parliament attempted to raise money from direct taxes in the colonies rather than regulation of trade. Stamp Act impacted every strata of the society. Popular outpour of discontent came through. Communities' right not to be taxed except by its elected representative. No American in House of Commons, so no taxation without representation. That makes sense now. Basically, almanacs are church documents, church diary. Very simply, if you don't represent me, you don't tax me. And the consequence of this whole episode is that the Stamp Act Congress is formed. They all come together. 27 delegates from the 9 colonies meet in New York. They said, okay, you will tax us. We will boycott all your goods. We will not take hats from you. We will not take iron from you. We will boycott. Now, a sense of American identity and unity developed, and this in turn led to processions and marches. The merchants, who were always the one who were impacted, now became leaders, and they started a slogan: liberty, property, no stamps. We will not pay for the stamps. So very simply, the Stamp Act is the blunder which also highlighted the defective colonial administrative setup, because the colonies were governed by governors, captains who were nominated by the British. There was an elected body under the governor, but the governor was not responsible to them. And there was always a basic conflict between legislature and executive, because executive was from the British and the legislature was from the people. And the people were not represented in the British Parliament. So they said, no, we will not let you tax us. This is the second major cause. The first cause of the American Revolution was it? What is it? What is the, that is the slogan. What is the first cause of the American Revolution? Come on. Honey, I am not talking about the death of Maria Theresa, the other one, Charles III. Okay, 7 Years' War. Very good. 7 Years' War in turn leads to attitudinal change. Very good. Perfect. Now, the second cause is what? Second cause. Very good. Stamp Act. Stamp Act. Stamp Act. Stamp Act is technically the blunder. Stamp Act is actually the blunder which was done by the British, which politically united everybody. Now, Stamp Act is repealed. Everybody is following me till this point. I hope now you are able to make sense of what we are doing. Don't worry, it is going to become a little bit more lucid. As you understand it, you will become better and better in this. Molasses Act, you can add as the second cause, then this is the third cause. It's totally on you. Attitudinal change and Stamp Act are two things which the UPSC examiner will look for. Now, very simply, Stamp Act is repealed. Now I'm again telling you the story. So in 1766, they repeal the Stamp Act, and they introduce a new act in its place, which is called the Townshend Duties. So what they do is that they go back to regulating trade and checking smuggling. But the damage is done. Now what happens is, under Townshend Duties, there is a very small provision that 2 military regiments will be stationed in Boston to check smuggling. See, now what is the whole concept is, there is now just a story of escalation, de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation, which is that the first escalation is Stamp Act, the de-escalation is Townshend Duty. But Townshend Duty is followed by this new concept that 2 military regiments will be placed in Boston, a very important city in Massachusetts itself. They will check smuggling. So now what happens is that the people had already become very, this is not the Boston Tea Party, I'm coming to that. The people had already become very, very aggressive. So what happens is, in the cold temperature of Boston, there's an incident which is called the Boston Massacre. Guess how many people died in this massacre? Guess. Five. More people die in a car crash in India. 5 people died, and it's called the Boston Massacre. It's called the Boston Massacre. Now, what is the concept of Boston Massacre? There were 6-7 different very young men, and they started to tease the regiment. They started to throw snowballs on them. So the British, being the British, backfired, and there's a very interesting imagery that the Boston people teased the regiment, and the regiment shooted on the Americans, and 5 people died. And now the Americans started to lose their mind. They were like, this is unacceptable. 5 people dead, this, that, you are the tyranny, you are this, you are that. And in the wake of the Boston Massacre, the British have to withdraw these 3 regiments also. So the next escalation is Boston Massacre, and the de-escalation is that these 2 regiments are withdrawn away. So very simply, what is followed by the Stamp Act is indirect taxation, tax imposed on import duties, new customs commissioner to suppress smuggling, 2 regiments of British soldiers posted in Boston to prevent smuggling, popular hostility and discontent, skirmish between soldiers and local, 5 people killed, British withdraw the soldiers. Now, very simply, there have been certain ebbs and flows, and the story is that there will be escalation, de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation. And there will be a point when there will be no de-escalation itself. So, the first escalation is what? The first escalation is what? Boston Massacre is 5 people dying in British shooting, nothing more. Very good is the Stamp Act, which is followed by Townshend duties. Thereafter, we have the second escalation, which is Boston Massacre, and that is followed by withdrawal of regiments. Now tell me one thing, have the British been accommodative or aggressive? You tell me. Have been accommodative or aggressive? They've technically not been aggressive. Every escalation has been followed by a de-escalation. So the British have been accommodative. No, koi baat nahi. You don't want to pay the Stamp Act, okay, we take it away. You don't like the regiments, we take it away. So very simply, they have been very, very accommodative. They've been accommodative. Now, and the British by this point of time have India. So British egos have been tested. Now the next escalation is actually linked to India, and it is called the Tea Act. And this is the last point we are going to do, what is called the Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party is the last thing which we do. Then I'll talk about Continental Congress tomorrow. But I'm visible, I'm audible, visible? Yes, no? Yes, okay. So the Tea Act is actually linked to India. And what is the story of India is that, and I'll tell you the basic story here. Which power technically colonized India? What is the power which colonized India? Via whom? Very good, the East India Company. Great. So via the East India Company, they colonized us. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So via the East India Company, the British colonized us. So in 1765, the British get what is called, I think I was looking towards the screen. There was an issue in that. Nothing here but there. So Tea Act, they get the Diwani rights. They get the Diwani rights of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. So now Robert Clive is asked, how much revenue do you think Bengal is going to produce? So Robert Clive says, we are expecting 3 crore dam, which is close to 1.5 lakh pounds, which is going to be generated. And there was no way Bengal in 1765 was going to give so much. So as you know, you would have done it. If you've not done it, East India Company is a joint stock company. Basically, East India Company has shareholders. Yes or no? It's a joint stock company. It has shareholders. Yes, very good. So if a company is getting lot of profit, the profit is redistributed to its shareholders via what is called as dividend. That if I am the shareholder of Ambani or of Amba, for example, Reliance Industries, I will get a bonus in the form of the dividend. So now, for example, East India Company stock was 2 pounds in 1765. Was in 2 pounds in 1765. The dividend which they used to get was 100 pounds or 200 pounds a year. Now they get to know that Clive has said that 3 crore dam, 1.5 lakh pounds is going to be generated. So now people want it in the form of dividend. So when there is less supply and more demand, what happens to the stock price? What happens to the stock price? It increases. Very good. So by 1766-67, the same 2 pound stock became 100 pounds worth of. 100 pounds for one stock. Everybody wants East India Company stock. This is called the Clivian financial bubble. You will do it in modern India. You would have done it in modern India. This is called the bubble which he created. Everybody wants East India Company stock. Dividend, maza aa jaye. But now what happens is that first round of collection happens in Bengal, and they are able to collect only 1 crore dam, which is close to 50 lakh pounds. And everybody gets pennies. Chillar batta hai. Everybody gets pennies in the form of dividend. So now people said, I bought this stock for 100 pounds. It is giving me 50 pounds of dividend. So everybody started to sell their stock. So when everybody started to sell their stock, when there is too much supply, what happens? It goes down. And this stock became from 2 pounds, it became 50 pence, meaning 50 paisa, 50 pence, this stock became. This is called the concept of the East India Company crisis. This is called the fiscal crisis of the East India Company. Its stock crashed and Clive had destroyed the East India Company stock because of his overestimation. Make sense, everybody, till this point? So now East India Company needs to be saved. And what the solution they find to save the East India Company is that they wanted to give East India Company a monopoly, virtual monopoly in America via what we call as the Tea Act. What the Tea Act said was that East India Company can import tea into America without paying even 1 rupee duty. And every other person had to pay duty, import and export both, but East India Company was exempted from it. This was the Crown's. This story is not important for you. Just understand the context of the Tea Act. The Tea Act context is East India Company's crisis. This is the Crown's attempt to save the East India Company by giving it a virtual monopoly in America, by giving it the concept that you don't have to pay any tax only when it comes to importing tea itself. And now the Americans say this will destroy our traders. This will destroy everybody's This will even neither the smugglers. East India Company could sell the tea at £1 or $1, and no one else could sell it at the same price because they had to pay a duty. So what happens is when East India Company ships start to dock with tea, most of the people rebel and they don't allow the East India Company tea stock to be docked. But in Boston, there was a very oppressive governor. His name was Hutchinson. He said, no, East India Company, the ship will get docked in the Boston harbor. So what the Sons of Liberty do, this revolutionary organization do, they go up the ship, and in the night, they throw all the tea into the Boston harbor in the Boston River. And this is called the Boston Tea Party. The Boston River, the Boston harbor started to look like a brown, totally became brown. And that is why the concept that the Boston River itself had become a teacup. Therefore, the concept of Boston Tea Party. And this technically is the starting point of no de-escalation. Now the Britishers will say, enough is enough. We will not tolerate this, and they will introduce a set of acts which are called the Intolerable Acts, which will say that everything which you threw, pay for it. If you don't pay for it, we will close the harbor, and you have to make sure that the regiments which are there are housed in the houses. We'll discuss this tomorrow. But basically, the Boston Tea Party was the last straw in the story and was a very important cause for the American Revolution, because in response to the Intolerable Acts, the Americans are going to form what is called the First Continental Congress, and now they will literally fight for their independence between 1776, where they have Declaration of Independence, to 1783, when they will finally become an independent country. The American Revolution is the American War of Independence. America will get independence through the American Revolution. Make sense, everyone? I'll discuss the Tea Party again tomorrow, but I'm trying to give you the larger picture. See, American Revolution this is the image of the Boston Tea Party. American Revolution has very simply 6 to 7 standard causes. One, and I'm again repeating here, attitudinal change because of the 7 Years' War, and I'll summarize everything tomorrow. Attitudinal change because of the 7 Years' War. Second, the Stamp Act, which was the political unification of the Americans. Thereafter, the Boston Massacre, which is the conflict becoming a little bit more and more aggressive. Third, or rather fourth, is the Boston Tea Party, which in turn led to the Intolerable Acts, which said that everybody pays, the elected bodies were removed, and there was a very bad clause that everybody has to house the military in their houses, which is going to impact everybody. And this in turn led to a response from the Americans in the form of the First and the Second Continental Congress, in which they were contemplating, should they get complete independence, should they still have a symbolic relationship with the Britishers, and they finally declare on 4th July 1776, which is called the Declaration of Independence, that we declare independence from the British, and they will fight for their independence via a war between 1776 and 83, and that is what is the American Revolution. Make sense, everyone? Basic story is clear. Everyone, come on. Stamp Act and Molasses Act is different. So tomorrow when we come back, we'll pick up the story at Tea Act, and then we will. The basic point of the matter is revise the PPT once. It's all logical. British invested nothing, wanted nothing, invested money, so they wanted more. Stamp Act, Boston Massacre, Tea Party, and Declaration of Independence. Right? So it's an interesting part. It is like this only. You will pick it up by the second and third class. A little bit, machine garam karne ki zarurat hai. You need to understand at a different level, because it's totally different to you. It's totally separate to you. It's not your history. That is why it's a little bit problematic. But with this, I would like to end the session. I will see you tomorrow at 5 again, and some of you in the morning with ancient medieval art and culture. I hope everything is making sense. It's not tough. Revise once. You don't have to learn the facts. It's a conceptual clarity which is needed. Once revise, you will find it easy. So I hope everything is making sense. If not, just revise once the PPT. It is not difficult. It's just heavy. And if still there is an issue, you email me at abhishek.mishra19@byju's.com, and we'll figure out something, what is the issue itself. Don't worry about that. The SMEs are there for the next half an hour to answer any of your questions. You can always send me a question. Within 48 hours, I will reply, because I get a large volume of emails itself, but I will reply for sure. Any logistical issue, anything, I'm your grievance redressal mechanism. But I hope basic points are clear. Today was a heavy class. Totally, I agree with you. Not superhuman, but revision will help, right? Thank you. Take care. I'll see you in the morning. If not, to morning, evening for sure. See you. Take care. Bye-bye.